What is going on in Daniel chapter 11 with the Antichrist and the beginning of Daniel chapter 12? All the wars and things that he's doing. What in the world is going on there? Let's dive in. Let's see if we can find the answer, guys. Thanks for joining us today. This is the Bible Explained, where we try to just simply take the Bible and explain it, or at least explain all the arguments about a passage, so that way you can then do your own research and come to a conclusion. The goal here is making these things easier to understand, easier to grasp, and giving you the tools to do your own research, your own work. That's the goal. Although I do have my own conclusions, I will also give you my conclusions. And today, the goal is Daniel chapter 11 and Daniel chapter 12. We are going to attempt to do a verse-by-verse walkthrough of Daniel 11 and Daniel 12 and explain what I believe it teaches about the end times, from a premillennial perspective, which is my perspective, and also explain the response from a postmillennial or preterist perspective that says that these prophecies aren't in the future, in the end times, they've already been fulfilled, which I think falls very, very short and is very weak in this section. In all of the book of Daniel, I think I've showed that over the last few live streams that we've done. But today, especially in Daniel 11 and 12, I think we'll find the preterist already fulfilled arguments as extremely weak. And this is why there's very few postmillennial preterists who will write or speak on Daniel 11 and 12. They try, in my experience, from my own personal study, I have found that they don't spend a lot of time trying to, I'm not going to try to mischaracterize them. They don't spend a lot of time trying to address these. But I do have a few things to respond to from Jay Rogers, who, to his credit, did do a lot of work and wrote a couple books that actually walk through Daniel and give a preterist postmillennial perspective. So we'll talk about that. We're going to get into all that. Let's do a few, like we do in every one of these videos. Let's define a few terms, and then we'll dive into Daniel 11. By the way, I about a year and a half, maybe 2 years ago, I preached through, probably a year and a half, I guess. I preached through the book of Daniel at our church. And so if you'd like to, I preached 3 sermons on the subject matter that I'm going to try to cover today. So this is going to be a long stream, guys. But if there might be some places that I breeze through a little quickly to get to a few what I think are more significant points. And so you might find other information if you want to go back and watch those. I've already, in the description to this video, linked my sermon series from Daniel. If you'd like to go and watch those later, you're welcome to do it. Don't do it now if you're watching live, guys. You got to finish this video first. Also, I've also linked in the description to this video a video by Mike Winger, who explains the first 35 verses of Daniel 11, I think, very well, and so I recommend that video as well. Okay, let's define a few terms, and then we'll jump right into Daniel 11, verse 1. Thanks for joining us today. Just a little side note, in case you didn't know, I will be taking questions at the end of the video. It might be a very long stream. It might be 2 hours from now. But if you leave, you can always come back and catch the recording later and see me answer your question. So if you put questions into the chat, put a capital Q in front of them. In fact, if you just put a capital, all caps, the word question, it'll be even easier to spot. But at least put a capital Q in front of it so that the moderator later can skim through them and find the ones that are questions and send them over to me. And I will attempt to answer all of those at the end. Okay, very good. Let's first define some terms. What's postmillennialism? What's premillennialism? What's preterism? What's all that kind of stuff? I already mentioned a little bit. Let me pull up something on your screen that just tries to simplify it for you. This is a standard premillennial timeline. You see, the tribulation is 7 years. We're right here. We're before the tribulation. In a premillennial timeline. We don't know how much time is between us and what we call the tribulation, although it's just a term. The Bible never calls the 7 years the tribulation, but there's a 7-year period of time lots of people call the tribulation, and then Jesus returns, and then you have a 1,000-year reign of Christ on this planet Earth before he makes a new heaven, a new earth, and there he goes on reigning for eternity. So the reign of Christ is eternal, but it begins with 1,000 years on this earth and then goes on forever into the new heaven and new earth. That's the standard premillennial timeline. There's other ideas. Some premillennials cancel out the 7 years, say that's already fulfilled, that kind of stuff. That's the idea. So when a premillennial reads things like Daniel and sees stuff about the Antichrist, then he's going to say, this is all stuff that's going to happen in these 7 years, the Antichrist, right before Jesus returns, right? But a postmillennial is going to see this differently. Let me pull up, there we go, the postmillennial timeline. The standard postmillennial timeline says that those 7 years, talked about in Daniel 9, the 70th week of Daniel, actually began at Jesus' baptism in 27 AD and ended 7 years later, 33, 34 AD, when the gospel went to Cornelius, the Gentiles, in Acts chapter 10. So they say Jesus was crucified halfway through. That's what some people call the abomination of desolation, but it's really just a picture of the final abomination of desolation that took place in 70 AD. And so they see in the ministry of Christ, his death on the cross, the gospel goes to the Gentiles in 34 AD, and then the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD. They see all of these prophecies having already been fulfilled. They think that millennial kingdom that's talked about when Jesus comes to this earth and reigns is what we're in right now, and it's not actually 1,000 years. It's just millennial. The word millennial or 1,000 is just sort of a figurative word that just talks about a lot of years. And so that we're in that right now, and that when Jesus will return once the church essentially conquers the earth, once the earth becomes Christian and all evil and sin has been put under the reign of the church, Jesus through his church. And then Jesus will return and then continue on reigning in person for eternity. So these are the two ideas. You can see the main difference is one of us says this is primarily stuff that hasn't happened yet, and the postmillennial takes what is called a preterist. So premillennial would be futurist, meaning it's not fulfilled yet, it's going to be fulfilled in the future. Postmillennial is primarily preterist, meaning it's already been fulfilled, pre-fulfillment, a preterist, right? And so those are your two differences. We're going to look at this passage, and we're going to pause at points and show where I think this is a very futurist passage that has not been fulfilled yet. But I need to make that case, and also I need to allow those who disagree with me have their say. And so I'm going to try to do all of those things in this video today. Buckle up, Buttercup. This is going to be a very fun, wild little ride here. Now, let me pull up. Yeah, you know what? I'm just going to do it this way. I did this for you. I went and made a chart this morning just for you guys. You're welcome. You're welcome. Okay, so this is Daniel 11, and the first 35 verses of Daniel 11 are contain 135 prophecies. Well, different people count it differently. Well, is this count as a separate one, or is that one? But essentially, it's about 135 different prophecies, and they've everyone agrees, all scholars agree that these have already been fulfilled. These are all past. All scholars, there's always going to be an outlier, but pretty much every scholar believes this. It's very clear, and so what we're going to do is we're going to start Daniel 11 by walking through the first 35 verses. I'm going to try to do it quickly, even though there's tons of content. I preached a whole sermon on those first 35 verses, and you can go watch that later. But I want to give you this because it's already been fulfilled. Now, you might be here saying, but I'm here to talk about the Antichrist. I get that. From verse 36 on, all the way through the end of chapter 12 is all about the wars of the Antichrist. That's why I titled the video today, The Wars of the Antichrist. But the problem is that the wars of the Antichrist, you can't really interpret that section if you don't know what's leading up to it. And so God gives us 135 prophecies that have already been fulfilled. That they were fulfilled about 200 and 300 years after Daniel wrote them, so that today we're able to look at those and see how they were fulfilled and the manner in which they were fulfilled and say that's what we should expect for our fulfillment of the Antichrist prophecies in verses 36 going on. So this is going to be, I think, very helpful for us. So you think, well, I want to get to the Antichrist, I want to get to the Antichrist. Well, if you're watching later, after a couple days after the stream, I'll go in and put timestamps in so you can go in and just skip right to the Antichrist part. But I think it's very helpful, so I'm going to include in the stream today going through, and I'm going to give you just the brief version if you want it more detailed. Again, Mike Winger has done it. He did a great job, but probably certainly better than I'm sure I'll do. And also I've preached a sermon on it, so you can go back and do those sorts of researches. To give it a little preface, Daniel 11 is actually not, how do I say this? So the book of Daniel, every chapter is pretty much an individual happening. Chapter 1 and 2 kind of runs together, even though they're two sort of individual things that are happening. Chapter 3 is an individual event. Chapter 4, an individual event. 5. You really have an individual vision start in chapter 7. You have an individual vision in chapter 7 that Daniel has. We already talked about that with the beasts and the kingdoms and all that. And then chapter 8, you have another vision that Daniel had. In chapter 9, you have another vision. But then in chapters 10, 11, and 12, the last 3 chapters of the book, it's all one thing. It's not one chapter is one vision, one chapter is another. It's actually all one. And chapter 10, we're not starting there today just for sake of time, but chapter 10 is all just like the angels coming up and talking to Daniel about the vision they're about to give him. And it's really just a preface to show how significant this vision is. I mean, that one of the angels was held up on his way there. He was detained by a demon, and like it appears that Daniel actually sees Jesus, like the Son of God, in human flesh, appear in front of him, or maybe in glorified flesh, I suppose, appear in front of him, and he falls on his face. It was just a glorious chapter. But I just want to give you that preface that 10, 11, and 12 are all one vision, and we're jumping in at the beginning of the information part of the vision, the prophecy part of the vision. But chapter 10 is where it's all prefaced, and in chapter 12, this will come into play because there'll be Daniel will say, "Then I asked this question to one of the angels that was standing by," and it's like, wait, there's angels standing by? Yes, that's what's going on in chapter 10. In chapter 11, we're kind of jumping into the middle of the story, but at the beginning of where the prophetic stuff starts. So just bear with me on that part. Okay, let's start by analyzing this. Verse 1 of chapter 11 says this. Remember, we're going to try to take the first 35 verses as sort of our introduction to the Antichrist stuff that starts in verse 36. So, also I, in the first year of Darius the Mede. Now, Darius the Mede is the guy who Cyrus the Great set up as the regent over the city of Babylon. When Cyrus, the emperor of Persia, conquered Babylon, he set up Darius the Mede over Babylon. So he says, in the first year of Darius the Mede, which would be also the first year after Cyrus conquered Babylon. So this is during the reign of Cyrus the Great. You can see that. Well, let me pull it up on your screen. There you go. During the year of Cyrus the Great, during the reign of Cyrus the Great. And he goes on to the next prophecy. Even I stood to confirm and to strengthen. This isn't a prophecy. Verse 2 starts the prophecy. And now I will show thee. I stood to confirm and strengthen him, by the way, is an angel who's talking to Daniel. That's just a side note, interesting thing. An angel was strengthening Cyrus so that Cyrus could conquer Babylon because it was part of the plan of God. Very cool. Anyway, verse 2. And now I will show thee the truth. Behold, there shall stand up yet 3 kings in Persia. So there's going to be 3 more kings in Persia, and then the 4th is the one I want to talk about, is basically what he's saying. Well, what are the next 3 kings that reign after Cyrus the Great? Well, looks like on your screen, the picture of me is covering up one of those, but it's Cambyses II, Pseudo-Smyrtus, and Darius. Those are the next 3 kings. Darius the first. Those are the next 3 kings in to reign over the kingdom of Persia, the empire. Now, the 4th king to reign over the empire of Persia would be Xerxes the first. In the Bible, he's referred to as Ahasuerus, and you read about him in the book of Esther. And he actually was a very rich king, and he had a very massive army. The thing that Artaxerxes did is that he invaded the Greek city-states in what is today Turkey and Greece, and Macedonia and all that. So he goes over there and actually gets a lot of the Greeks very mad at him for how he did it. And he when he invaded, you may have seen the movie The 300, the story of the 300 people, 300 Greeks who stood and resisted his army and all this stuff. Well, the Greeks never forgot that. Look at what happens. Look at what, by the way, this is all stuff that happens years after Daniel is prophesying this. We're talking 200 and 300 years after Daniel makes this prophecy. Daniel's 535 BC when he's making the prophecy. These things are happening beginning, I think, in the 300s BC. Okay, Alexander the Great, verse 3. And a mighty king shall stand up and shall rule with great dominion and shall do according to his will. Notice what happens to Ahasuerus. He shall be far richer than they all, and by his strength, through his riches, he shall stir up all against the realm of Grecia, which he did. He invaded Greece. And a mighty king shall stand up that shall rule with great dominion and do according to his will. Alexander the Great, about 150 years after Ahasuerus invaded, the Greeks were still angry about this invasion by the Persians. And Alexander the Great rallied the Greek city-states and formed the Greek Empire. In 13 years, by the way, they ended up conquering the Persians in 13 years. Lightning speed. And many historians say we don't know how they won this battle. And it was just because they were so mad. They were very angry. Verse 4 says, and when he shall stand up, his kingdom shall be broken, and shall be he will rule with great dominion and do according to his will. He stirred up all against the realm of Grecia. So the Greeks are stirred up. This is exactly what happens. Verse 4, when he shall stand up, his kingdom shall be broken and shall be divided toward the four winds of heaven. It's very interesting that they were celebrating his victory over Persia. He had just conquered the known world, Persia. And this is when Alexander the Great suddenly died. Some people say that he was poisoned and killed. We don't know for sure, but at any rate, when the dust all settled, there was some battle among his generals. When the dust settled, he didn't have a son that took over after him. Instead, 4 of his generals took over, and they were Cassander, Lysimachus, Ptolemy, and Seleucus. Now, Cassander took the area that we know today as Greece, Lysimachus, what we know today as Turkey. So you have east and west. And then you have Ptolemy in Egypt and Seleucus in Syria, Babylon, and Persia. So that's north and south from Israel. So it says he's divided towards the four winds of heaven. Okay, north, south, east, west. And not to his posterity. So it's not his son who takes over after him, nor according to his dominion which he ruled, for his kingdom shall be plucked up, even for others besides those. So it goes to someone else, and these are 4 of his generals. Now, this is very interesting because what we're seeing, and even just the first 4 verses, is that every single piece of this is fulfilled very specifically and very obviously. These are public things that are known to historians. For the last thousands of years, historians have written about these things. These are not things that are secret, that are in backdoor meetings that nobody knows about. Oh, secretly he was this or secretly he was that, or we just don't know. He must have been. These are public, obvious, provable things that God wants us to know actually were fulfilled. That's cool, and it also helps us understand what we should expect when we get to the Antichrist part, right? So let's move on before we take up all of our time just on the first 35 verses. Okay, we'll just read through and I'll point out how these are fulfilled. Verse 5, and the king of the south shall be strong, and one of his princes, actually one of his satraps, one of his men who's ruling underneath him, the king of the south is the Ptolemy dynasty, Ptolemy the first. One of his satraps was a man named Seleucus the first. He shall be strong above him and have dominion. His dominion shall be a great dominion. So one of his lower rulers actually rebelled against him and took the region. You see over here, Seleucus ended up with Syria, Babylon, and Persia. Seleucus the first stole it after ruling it underneath Ptolemy. He ends up stealing it and taking it for himself. And these become the focus of the rest of these next several verses. Is the north, which would be the Seleucan Empire of the Greeks, the Syria, Babylon, Persia area, and then the south, the Ptolemaic dynasty of the Greeks, the Egypt and Libya and the Africans. Why is that north and south? Because Israel's right in between those, right? You got Syria, Babylon, all this stuff to the north. And then you've got Egypt and Africa to the south. And so this becomes the focus of the rest of these prophecies, these two dynasties, Ptolemy and Seleucus. Okay? So, verse 6, and at the end of years, they shall join themselves together, for the king's daughter of the south shall come to the king of the north. Now, to give you an idea of the timing, we're from verse to verse, we're skipping from one king of the dynasty to the next king of the dynasty to the next king of the dynasty, so we're moving forward. Now we're in Ptolemy the second. Ptolemy the second, let me give you some dates here. Ptolemy the second would have been, we're talking about 246 is when he died. So Ptolemy, so a little before 246. Ptolemy the second wants to make a peace deal with the king of the north, who's now Antiochus the second. So Ptolemy II wants to make a deal with Antiochus II, so he gives him his daughter Berenice. Now, the problem is Antiochus II is already married, so Antiochus II divorces his wife, puts her away, and her name was Laodice, and Laodice is not happy about that. So Berenice comes and marries Antiochus II, but as soon as Ptolemy II died, Antiochus II immediately put away Berenice and took Laodice back. Well, it says that she shall not retain power, the power of the arm, neither shall he stand nor his arm, but he shall be given up, and they that brought her and he that begot her, and he that begot her, that's Ptolemy II, he died, and immediately she's put away, so she does not retain the power of the arm, and he that strengthened her in these times. This is all specifically fulfilled. In fact, Laodice poisoned Antiochus II because she was angry that he had married Berenice, and so even though she eventually murdered Berenice and Berenice's child. That's what it was. So Laodice, when she comes back into power, she poisons her husband, Antiochus II, and then tracks down Berenice and Berenice's child so that Berenice's child doesn't have claim to the throne, and kills them as well. So they all die, just like verse 6 says. Then verse 7 says, but a branch out of her roots. That's Berenice's roots. Her roots would be her father, Ptolemy II. A branch out of her father's roots would be the next king, or Berenice's brother. That would be Ptolemy III. I keep want to say Ptolemy. It's just Ptolemy. It's like pterodactyl, right? Let me go to the next verse here. All right. So a branch out of her roots would be Ptolemy III. Shall stand up in his estate, which shall come with an army, and shall enter into the fortress of the king of the north. This is now Seleucus II, Laodice's son, and shall deal against them, and shall prevail, and shall also carry captives into Egypt their gods, with their princes and their precious vessels of silver and gold, and he shall continue more years than the king of the north. This did in fact happen. Ptolemy III came in and invaded and killed Laodice, and invaded all the way up until the Euphrates River, and then turned around and left. He did what he wanted to do. He killed the one who killed his sister, and then he leaves. So the king of the south shall come into his own land, and shall return into his own land, right? Shall come into his kingdom, and shall return into his own land. Verse 10, but his sons shall be stirred up. Now, the king of the south comes back, but his sons, meaning Seleucus II's sons, are stirred up to respond to the king of the south. This is the king of the north. And his sons refers to Seleucus II's sons after Seleucus II is dead, and that's Seleucus III and Antiochus III. This Antiochus III is known as Antiochus the Great. But Seleucus III is the initial guy who takes control, and he assembles a great army to attack, to respond and to attack. But he dies. He's killed a little bit before he can invade. So then Antiochus III takes over, his brother, and he actually attacks back at Ptolemy III. And so this is again fulfilled exactly as it said. One shall certainly come. Only one of the two brothers will come and overflow and pass through, and then shall he return and be stirred up even to his fortress. Okay, now the king of the south. And the king of the south, this is now Ptolemy III is dead, so we're now on Ptolemy IV. He's also known as Ptolemy Philopator. He shall be moved with choler and shall come and fight with him, and even with the king of the north. This is Antiochus III, Antiochus the Great, right? And he shall set forth a great multitude, but the multitude shall be given into his hand. And when he hath taken away the multitude, his heart shall be lifted up, and he shall cast down many 10,000s, but he shall not be strengthened by it. This is actually an ancient battle that's well known to historians. It's known as, let me make sure I get this right. It's called the Battle of Raphia. And we know that there was at least 70,000 foot soldiers in the Battle of Raphia. That's why it says many 10,000s, but many other soldiers as well, riding elephants and all this kind of stuff. And it's a very well-known, documented battle. And yes, Ptolemy succeeded in that, but he's not strengthened by it. He doesn't retain any land. He doesn't keep Syria or anything. He goes back. But the king of the north shall return and set forth a multitude greater than the former, and shall certainly come after certain years with a great army and much riches. Let's go to the next page here. And in those times there shall stand up against the king of the south, this is Ptolemy the fifth, also the robbers of thy people, and shall exalt themselves to establish the vision, but they shall fall. This time the king of the north, as Antiochus the Great, comes through, and the robbers of thy people, means Daniel's people, they join up. They're sick and tired of being ruled by the Ptolemies, because the Ptolemies have come up through Israel and attacked the north, and they control Israel. They don't want to be controlled by the Ptolemies anymore. So some of the people of Israel join up, some of the violent men, that's what robbers mean, some of the violent, baser men, join up with Antiochus the Great and go and attack Ptolemy with him. And he gets other people, I think Philip the Great of Macedon or something like that. I might be getting that name wrong. He gets other alliances together to go and attack Ptolemy. But eventually, the problem is the people of Israel who joined up with him, they failed in their endeavor because Antiochus was just as tyrannical to them as was Ptolemy. So it didn't really help them very much. But verse 15 says, so the king of the north shall come and cast a mount and take the most fenced cities, and the arms of the south shall not withstand, neither his chosen people, neither shall there be any strength to withstand. But he that cometh against him shall do according to his own will. That's Antiochus the Great. He is successful in this campaign. And none shall stand before him, and he shall stand in the glorious land, which by his hand shall be consumed. He's very, very hard on the people of Israel as he marches through and retakes this land into through Israel. Verse 17, he shall also set his face to enter with the strength of his whole kingdom, and upright ones with him. Thus shall he do, and he shall give him the daughter of women, corrupting her, but he shall not stand on his side, neither before him. So he comes down and he sort of conquers, he sort of subjugates the southern kingdom of the Ptolemies. And to make sure that the Ptolemies stay in line with Antiochus the Great, Antiochus the Great gives him to wife his daughter Cleopatra. Now, he expects Cleopatra to help keep this guy in line, but Cleopatra actually sides with her husband over her father, and they rebel. So she shall not, notice what it says, she shall not stand on his side, neither before him. After this, shall he turn his face unto the isles? Now, this is talking about the northern Mediterranean area, and Antiochus the Great, it did in fact invade what we call Turkey, the northern Mediterranean provinces, and he is successful until they send a letter to Rome and ask Rome to help them. And now, if you understand what's going on right now in history, Rome is the rising power, and these two squabbling powers in the Middle East, the northern Greek Empire of the Seleucids and the southern Greek Empire of the Ptolemies, are actually keeping each other distracted while Rome rises in strength. And so when these Mediterranean city-states ask for help from Rome, Rome comes. And they actually send a General Manius Achilles Galabrio, who comes and routs Antiochus the Great, and not only does he defeat him, but he forces him to pay back the cost of the war to Rome. So he is extremely strapped for cash going forward now. The Ptolemies have rebelled against him, and he's not gotten anything. He's actually have to pay back all this extremely high cost of the war. So that's why it says, he shall turn his face unto the isles, and shall take many, but a prince for his own behalf shall cause the reproach offered by him to cease. Without his own reproach he shall cause it to turn upon him, and he shall turn his face toward the fort of his own land, but he shall stumble and fall and not be found. This is actually what he did in order to try to pay back this massive, exorbitant cost for the cost of the war that he has to pay back to Rome now. He gets pretty desperate. He even invades personally. Antiochus the Great invades his own temples and his own land, and is caught robbing from his own temples. They think he's a thief, and they kill him. And that's how Antiochus the Great ends, trying to get money. Now, his son, it says, then shall stand up in his estate a raiser of taxes. That would make sense, because he's got to find a way to pay this all back, right? So there's going to stand up in his estate a raiser of taxes. That's Seleucus IV. That's Antiochus, one of Antiochus's sons. Now, Antiochus's other son, when he was conquered by the Romans, when he was thwarted by the Romans, they took his second son to Rome as a captive. He's not the official next heir anyway, but to make sure that Antiochus the Great didn't rebel against them, they took Antiochus IV to his son to Rome and kept him captive there. So his son Seleucus IV, Antiochus has two sons, Seleucus IV and Antiochus IV, who's also called Philopator, is a raiser of taxes. He doesn't live very long. Some say that he is murdered by Antiochus, because it says, in the glory of his kingdom, but within a few days he shall be destroyed, neither in anger nor in battle. So Antiochus convinces the Romans, while he's held captive, to exchange him for Seleucus's son. Well, you don't need me anymore because my dad's dead, right? You need Seleucus's son. So he gets the Romans to capture Seleucus's son and release him. Antiochus then goes, and most people believe that he's the one who poisoned or arranged the plot to poison Seleucus IV. And so he kills his own brother. And then the next guy who's supposed to be in charge is Seleucus's infant son. But since he's an infant, Antiochus says, I will sort of mentor him. I will lead him until he's ready to take the kingdom. And as soon as the son gets old enough to take the kingdom, Antiochus IV kills him and takes the kingdom. So Antiochus becomes the next person. That's why it says, in his estate shall stand up a vile person to whom they shall not give the honor of they don't give him the honor of the kingdom, but he shall come in peaceably and attain the kingdom by flatteries. And with the arms of a flood shall they overflow from before him and shall be broken. Yea, also the prince of the covenant. So the prince of the covenant here is referring to Onias, the high priest in Israel. When Antiochus finally gains control over the Greek Empire, the northern Greek Empire, the Seleucid Greek Empire, he begins to persecute the Jews because he calls himself Antiochus Epiphanes, which means the appearance of God. He believes that he's God in human flesh, and the Jews will not worship him as God. So he actually sells the high priesthood. He removes Onias, who's the rightful high priest, and sells the high priesthood first to a man named Jason, and then later he sells the high priesthood to a guy named Menelaus, who's not even a Levite. And this is, of course, absolutely terrible. And this is recorded for us, by the way. The prophecy specifically of all the abominations that Antiochus does is recorded for us in Daniel 8. We talked about that in our last stream. Anyway, so this is what's being detailed here in Daniel 11. You say, what about the Antichrist? We're almost there. I promise. Okay. And after the league made with him, he shall work deceitfully, for he shall come up and become strong with a small people. He shall enter peaceably, even upon the fattest places of the province, and he shall do that which his fathers have not done, nor his fathers' fathers. He shall scatter among them the prey and spoil and riches. He would actually steal. He would tax people and even just take money from his own people, but then he would give the money to strategically give the money strategically out to his generals and to people that he needs to support him. So he scatters the riches. So he looks very generous, but he's stealing them from other people. And he shall forecast his devices against the strongholds even for a time. He even actually goes and steals from the temple in Jerusalem. He shall stir up his power and courage against the king of the south. Now, the guy in the south, and the Ptolemy in Egypt at this time, is Ptolemy the sixth. And he goes with a great army to the king of the south, and shall be stirred up to battle with a very great army and mighty army, but he shall not stand, for they shall forecast devices against him. So he comes against them. He succeeds fairly well, but doesn't accomplish everything he wants to do. This is what we know from history. Let's just try to speed this up a little bit. Yea, that feed of the portion of his meat shall destroy him, and his army shall overflow, and many shall fall down slain. So this is Antiochus Epiphanes is actually relatively successful. So he comes down into the south and he attacks, and it says, they that feed of the portion of his meat, that's the king of the south. His own brother is actually conspires against him and betrays him and gives him bad advice and tells him to flee the city because it's being attacked by Antiochus, and he actually gets captured, and Antiochus is pretty successful. He actually conquers the Ptolemies here. And it says, both these kings, that's referring to these two brothers, shall do mischief, and they shall speak lies at one table. They're sitting at the table, and they're lying to each other, and actually stabbing each other back, and it's this whole thing. Long story, but it shall not prosper, for the end shall be at the time appointed. Antiochus is going to be successful at this campaign into Egypt. Then shall he return to his land with greater riches, and his heart shall be against the holy covenant. He shall do exploits and return to his own land. So Antiochus goes back up to his land in the north, and he stops in Jerusalem and does terrible things to the people of Israel. The next time he comes through, though, he comes back down, and this time the Ptolemies again have rebelled against him. And it says, at a time point he shall return and come toward the south, but it shall not be as the former or as the latter. It's not going to be the way that he wanted it to. It's not going to work out the way he wants it to be. For this time he comes, and he's actually being very successful. I think he's on his way to Alexandria. I'm just going off the top of my head. You can do more study on this later. But it says that the ships of Chittim shall come against him. Now this is Chittim is just a place. Cyprus. It's Cyprus. It's a word that refers to Cyprus along the Mediterranean Sea, which is where the Romans would probably have gone in order to get ships to sail down into Egypt. And so this is referring to the Romans coming and meeting him. And in fact, it is true that Gaius Pompilius Lennius came and met him on the seaside in ships and said, you will not attack the Ptolemies. Now, this is because he's about to finally and eternally conquer the Ptolemaic Empire and rule all of the Middle East. Well, that's going to be a problem for Rome, because Rome is successfully rising to power because there's this conflict between the north and the south in the Middle East among the Greeks. If Antiochus Epiphanes wins this, it's going to be harder for Rome to conquer him later. So the Rome shows up and on the beach as Antiochus Epiphanes is marching towards Alexandria, if I'm not mistaken. And Gaius Pompilius Lennius meets with Antiochus and says, listen, if you go and attack any further into Egypt, you will be at war with Rome. We are going to attack you. And Antiochus says, well, let me think about it for a minute, for a few days. And Gaius Pompilius Lennius takes out a stick and draws in the sand a circle around Antiochus Epiphanes and says, you will give me your answer before you step outside of this circle, or you'll be at war with Rome. It's the line in the sand, right? And so Antiochus is very angry. He knows he can't battle Rome. And so he goes home in a rage, and who does he take it out on? Well, he takes it out on the Jews on his way back through Israel from Egypt back up to Syria. So, for the ships of Chittim shall come against him, therefore he shall be grieved and return and have indignation against the holy covenant. So shall he do. He shall even return and have intelligence with them that forsake the holy covenant, meaning he conspires with the renegade Jews who are Hellenized and Greek, and he conspires with them to overthrow anyone who's faithful to the law of God in Israel. And arms shall stand on his part, and they shall pollute the sanctuary of strength. He offers a pig on the altar. He sets up an image of Zeus, which he thought was himself, in the temple. I mean, he's killing people for not eating pork. I mean, this is really bad. Sets up a nude sporting ring outside of the temple where uncircumcised nude men will be running around. I mean, just evil, terrible stuff. Of course, the worst of it. Well, it's one of the worst things being selling the high priesthood to a non-Levite. Just awful things. But the arms shall stand on his part. He shall pollute the sanctuary of strength. He shall take away the daily sacrifice. They can't offer sacrifice on an altar that's been polluted with pig blood. And they shall place the abomination. That's speaking of the idol to Zeus in that maketh desolate in the temple. It's unusable. It's desolate. And such as do wickedly against the covenant shall he corrupt by flatteries, but the people that do know their God shall do strong and do exploits. Who's that? That's speaking about the Maccabees. You guys ever heard of the Maccabees? There's a whole book, 2 books, 1st and 2nd Maccabees, that are historical accounts of what the Maccabees did. If you're a Catholic, you believe they are scripture. I think that's wrong. We'll talk about that on another day. Let's talk about the Maccabees. Such as do wickedly against the covenant, he shall corrupt by flatteries, but the people that know their God shall be strong and do exploits. And that's the Maccabees. They resist. They revolt against the Antiochus Epiphanes and the Greeks. And eventually they actually conquer the city of Jerusalem and purify the temple. That's what the Feast of Hanukkah is, the Feast of Dedication, to remember when they retook the temple and purified it. And they that understand among the people shall instruct many, yet they shall fall by the sword and by flame and by captivity, by spoil many days. So there are many days where they are not doing so well, the Maccabees. Now when they shall fall, they shall be holpen with a little help, but many shall cleave to them with flatteries. Some people join with the Maccabees just as at the end as they start to win, but some people will help them. And some of them of understanding shall fall to try them and to purge and to make them white. Some of the Maccabees did die, even to the time of the end, because it is yet for a time appointed. So those 35 verses are very specific. You can do more research on this, much more to be said about them, but they're very specific and they're very obviously specifically fulfilled very clearly in the Greek Empire. Okay, from verse 36, we're going to start talking about the Antichrist. And this is where we really want to get to, and this is quite interesting. And look at how, remember that in Daniel chapter 8, Daniel gives us the abomination of Antiochus Epiphanes. Remember that? And then in Daniel chapter 9, he uses it to talk about a guy during the time when, after the time that the Messiah is cut off, somebody's going to do, and then he uses the same wording that he used back in chapter 8. Abomination, desolate, all that kind of stuff. Something like what Antiochus Epiphanes did in the Greek Empire. Well, Daniel's already set up this parallel thing where Antiochus is a picture of this guy in the Roman Empire who's going to do an abomination of desolation. He's going to do this again in Daniel chapter 11. We see all the way up to Antiochus Epiphanes, king by king by king, specifically 200-300 years before they happen. Daniel is predicting these things. It's amazing. It's an amazing testament to the truth of Scripture. This is something that we have copies of Daniel, but the copy of Daniel dates back to before these things happened, to the beginning of the Greek Empire. I mean, there's just no way around this. This proves without a doubt there is a God, supernatural things happen, and the Bible is a supernatural book. There's no way around that, right? But it also helps us understand the specific way to interpret this stuff about the Antichrist. Look at what it says here. It says, some of them of understanding shall fall to try them and to purge and to make them white even to the time of the end, because it is yet for a time of appointed. Meaning these types of things are going to continue happening all the way until the end. And there is a time appointed in the future. There's a end time appointed for this. Like this is a picture of stuff that will happen in the end. That's very interesting. That means that we should expect to see the same kinds of things repeated over and over until it's finally fulfilled completely in one person finally. Now, this is, for our discussion today, this is actually incredibly interesting. I think it's incredibly important because a premillennial is going to say, all the stuff here we're about to look at about the Antichrist is stuff that is in the future. It hasn't been completely fulfilled yet. A postmillennial, a preterist, is going to say, no, isn't it really similar to what we see with Julius Caesar? Isn't it really similar to what we see with when Jesus died on the cross? Isn't it very similar to what we see in 70 A.D., Titus Vespasian, and then Titus his son? Isn't it very similar to what we see with Nero? And the answer is, of course it is. The expectation is that these kinds of similar things will continue to repeat themselves until the time of the end when it is finally fulfilled. This is the statement that's made here, and I think it's a very important one. Now that I've showed you all those, I made up all those slides for that. Now I want to just go straight to the Bible text and just read from my, there it is, from the Logos here. So we're going to verse 36, and the king. So it is at the time of the end is what we're talking about, right? And it says, and the king shall do according to his will. Now, you say, well, how do you know that's not the king, Antiochus Epiphanes? Well, besides the fact that these things aren't fulfilled in Antiochus Epiphanes, you only have to skip down a little ways and see what happens. Verse 40, at the time of the end, again, telling us this is not the same, this is an end times thing, shall the king of the south push at him and the king of the north. Okay, who was Antiochus Epiphanes in the previous verses? Well, he was the king of the north, right? Now we have, at the time of the end, the king of the north and the king of the south are going to push against this king. This king is a different king. He can't be the king of the north. He can't be the king of the south. He's somewhere else. Well, we've just seen how there's one other player involved. It's the Romans, right? It wasn't the Romans that came, the ships of Chittim or Cyprus, right? So now we get a good idea that this is a Roman. If you have even read the rest of Daniel, you know Daniel chapter 9 points specifically, the timing points exactly to the Roman Empire and talks about Romans who will do abominations like Antiochus in Daniel chapter 8. So we know this is a Roman king. You can take one verse and say, maybe that's not a Roman king. Maybe it's not Rome in chapter 7. You can take one verse in chapter 9 and say, well, maybe it's not. But if you put these together, the weight of the evidence is so overwhelming. This has to be a Roman king, and it has to be an end times thing. Now, a preterist is going to say end times, meaning the end of the age, the beginning of the millennium, the first century is what they believe. So they still believe it's already fulfilled. But it has to be something much further out into the future than Antiochus. We know that. We know it's got to be in Rome. So very interesting. Now let's just work through what this says, because I believe this is something that has not happened yet, and we're going to see, or someone's going to see, if the rapture happens before this happens. And I do believe that probably will be the case, but we're not going to talk about the rapture today. Don't get me distracted, guys. I know you guys. You want to get me distracted on the rapture. Anyway, so here we go. The king shall do according to his will. Here's the Antichrist. He'll do according to his will, and he shall exalt himself and magnify himself above every god. Now, this is something unique. Let me show you just so that way, as we're walking through this, we can compare. A premillennialist says this hasn't been fulfilled yet, not entirely. This has to be in the future when the Antichrist comes. One of the things about him is he's going to exalt himself above God. This fits with 2 Thessalonians chapter 2 that talks about the Antichrist sitting in the temple, claiming that he is God. This fits with Revelation 13, where the Antichrist is putting up an image of himself and causing people to worship it and take his mark. This fits very well from a premillennial futurist perspective. This hasn't been fulfilled yet. Let me show you what preterists say about this, if I may. Here we go. So this is from J. Rogers. He likes to share not only what he believes, but also what other preterists have believed. And he points out that John Calvin thought that the king would have just been, this king is all of the Roman empires, the first 10 of the Roman emperors, from Julius Caesar all the way to Titus. And so you've got 10 Roman emperors there. And those 10 that they believe is what the 10 toes in chapter 2 are, and the 10 kings in chapter 7, that these are all called the king in verse 36. Well, I think that's a very, very bad interpretation. No offense to John Calvin. He's in heaven, so he agrees with me now. So, he would anyway, John Calvin, obviously a brilliant man, as far as I can tell, far more brilliant than I am, though I disagree with him about several things. But I think he was wrong about this, because if you look at Daniel chapter 11, the king of the south, the king of the north, this king, that king, the other king, these are not whole empires. These are specific kings. That's the entire preface for 35 verses. We have specific kings. This is a specific king. Okay, so then J. Rogers has a different idea. He says that he believes that Daniel 11:36 through 45 does refer to Rome, but all of the Roman Empire, but specifically it refers to Julius Caesar's civil war with Pompey the Great as the king of the north, and Pompey the 13th as the king of the south. That's his claim. And let me pull up one more slide here from his book. These are all just screenshots from the Kindle book. But let's see. Let's pull up one more slide here on Julius Caesar. Yeah, here we go. So he says, in early 46 BC, Julius Caesar, having conquered Pompey the 13th in Egypt, marched on to Pontus in Asia Minor and defeated Phoenice in the battle. It says that on his way to Asia Minor, he encamped with his troops in Judea. So this is something that's going to be said later in Daniel chapter 11, that he sets his tents, or he encamps near Jerusalem. So they're like, look, see, Julius Caesar fulfills this. Julius Caesar fulfills this. Okay, well, does he fulfill all of this? Just because he warred with someone to the south and someone to the north of Israel, and just because he at one point camped somewhere near Israel, near Jerusalem, that doesn't it doesn't mean he's going to. Those aren't the only prophecies here. So let's look at the prophecies here and to see if he fulfills all of those. So here we go. And he shall speak marvelous things against the God of gods, and shall prosper till the indignation be accomplished. Now, Premillennial says, look, this is something unique. It's not like all the other kings who kind of just claim that they're God. It's got to be more like Antiochus Epiphanes, who saw himself as God incarnate and insisted that other people worship him as God. Julius Caesar did that, but not quite the way that Antiochus did. You would think some of the later Roman Empire emperors did that more. I suppose Nero was a little bit more like that. You have Roman emperors in the 200s, 300s who were a lot more like that. Julius Caesar, it's true, but I don't that he considered himself to be God and all that kind of stuff. But I don't think that's quite the same as Antiochus. But there's at least enough parallel where you could get away with it, right? This isn't you couldn't really say, well, postmillennialism is wrong from this, right? Let's see what it says next. He shall speak marvelous things against the God of gods. Okay, Julius Caesar never really said all that much against Yahweh, God of Jews. I mean, he didn't. We have no record. Guys, if you find something that contradicts me here, I'm saying I have not found this. I don't know of any of this. If you find something, please send it to me. But I know of no record in history where Julius Caesar spoke specifically against the Yahweh God of the Jews. I don't know where he did that or where he said that. That's a prophecy that's either not fulfilled, or there's no reason to say that it's fulfilled, or it's still going to be fulfilled in the future, which, of course, a premillennial has no problem saying, yeah, this isn't fulfilled yet. This is the Antichrist in the future. We believe that the Antichrist will specifically speak against the God of Israel, the true God of the Bible. and counter that by claiming to be the true God of the Bible. Julius Caesar never claimed to be the God of the Bible and never spoke directly against the God of the Bible. He just thought himself to be God, like every ancient emperor kind of did. Antiochus Epiphanes spoke against the God of the Bible and wanted them to worship him as if he were the only true God. And so there's a Antiochus Epiphanes is the prototype for the Antichrist. If Julius Caesar is the fulfillment of the prototype given to us in Antiochus Epiphanes, why is it that Julius Caesar looks nothing like Antiochus Epiphanes? Like nothing at all. You see, the fact that Antiochus Epiphanes is set up as the prototype for this Roman emperor really rules out Julius Caesar or any Roman emperor we've had so far, because none of them really did anything very similar to what Antiochus did. So did they destroy Jerusalem in 70 AD? Yes. But did they come in and offer a pig on the altar? No. Did they sell the high priesthood to the highest bidder, a person who's not a Levite? No. So like these kinds of things are just not parallel. And yet Daniel seems to show Antiochus as a parallel to the Antichrist. And if the Antichrist was Julius Caesar, this doesn't work, right? At any rate, so he shall speak marvelous things against the God of gods. He shall prosper till the indignation be accomplished. Now, whatever this is probably a reference to Daniel 9. So you'd have to debate what is Daniel 9 talking about in verse 26 and 27. But he's going to prosper till the indignation be accomplished. I think that's saying he's going to prosper until God's done with him, and then Jesus returns and destroys him. So whatever amount of time he's allowed to prosper, he prospers, but that's all. And I think that's the 7 years that Daniel spoke about in Daniel 9. For that is determined shall be done, meaning his end is already certain. He's only going to prosper for so long, and then his end comes. Okay? Neither shall he regard the God of his fathers, nor the desire of women, nor regard any God, for he shall magnify himself above all. So this is the general, I'm better than all gods. Even though verse 36 was a more specific, he's going to magnify himself against the God of gods. That's got to be the Yahweh God of the Old Testament, the Jewish God, that God, right? He's specifically going to speak against him. That kind of rules out Julius Caesar. Where here, we're talking about him not regarding the God of his fathers, nor the desire of women. Now, they say, well, see, Julius Caesar didn't regard the God of his fathers. See, he said, you got to worship me. Well, he still regarded the God of his fathers, though. I mean, the Romans still worship the same gods. They just added Julius Caesar to it, right? I mean, he didn't overthrow the gods of his fathers. The Antichrist, when he comes, he's supposed to actually disregard every god but himself. You can't worship any other god. I'm the only God. He considers himself to be the only God. Now it says, nor the desire of women. There's speculation about what that means. Does he not love women? Does he not care about women loving him? Does he hate his mother? I think probably the best explanation I've found for this is that he's saying, he shall not regard the God of his fathers, nor the desire of women. So the God of his fathers would be his father's God, desire of women. He doesn't care what his mother loved. So it's almost like the God of his mother, right? I think that's probably a good guess at what that phrase is referring to. The God of his father or the God of his mother. Nor regard any God. Notice that it's still about gods. God of his father, nor any God. So desire of women probably has to do with a God that women worship, or maybe the God his mother worshipped. For he shall magnify himself above all, meaning all gods. But in his estate he shall honor the God of forces, and a God whom his fathers knew not shall he honor with gold and silver and precious stones and pleasant things. So he honors himself, but he also treats weapons of war as if they were a god. Now, this is something that I suppose you could say, well, Julius Caesar did this, but I mean, every emperor in that sense did, amasses of a large army and all this stuff. There's something peculiar about the way the Antichrist does this, that we don't see anything peculiar about Julius Caesar, especially in his amassing of armies and forces. But there's something peculiar about how the Antichrist will actually worship the amassing of forces, the amassing of weapons. This is something I don't know how this plays out, but it doesn't seem like it fits well with something that has already happened. Because what we've seen in the past of emperors amassing forces and armies and weapons is pretty standard. There's no Julius Caesar doesn't stand out as something different, but this has to be something different, or else it would be no reason to say it, right? Verse 39, thus shall he do in the most strongholds with a strange god, whom he shall acknowledge and increase with glory, and he shall cause them to rule over many, and shall divide the land for gain. So he ends up dividing the land and getting much gain, and worshiping a strange god, but the strange god is himself and his might and his power and his forces. This is interesting. This is something I don't know we have a really direct parallel anywhere in history. And it doesn't fit super well with Julius Caesar or anything. And that's why Calvin says, well, it's just all of the Roman Empire, so we can piece together all these different things and say that's it, right? But that doesn't fit with the first 35 verses, which don't allow for kings to be whole empires. They're individual kings. And so if you take it and just say, well, I'm going to change it and make it whatever fits best for my view, then yeah, you're going to say this is the Roman Empire. But if you actually are looking for what the text is suggesting is the correct interpretation here, I don't think you could do that. All right, let's go to verse 40. At the time of the end, this is where we get to the war of the Antichrist. What war is he involved in? This is cool, guys. Okay, I know. You've been waiting for an hour, and finally we're getting to the war of the Antichrist, and the whole title of this whole thing is the war of the Antichrist. I know, but we have to give the preface. And at the time of the end shall the king of the south push at him, and the king of the north shall come against him like a whirlwind, with chariots and with horsemen and with many ships. He shall enter into the countries and shall overflow and pass over. So the king of the south and the king of the north come at him, and he goes in and attacks them back. So could this work with Julius Caesar? I suppose, yeah. But who is the king of the north? Who is the king of the south? Well, let me give you kind of like a visual representation of this. If I can go back to my slides here, let's see. All right. So if you look at Europe, right? Europe and the Middle East, everything. We've established that in Daniel chapter 7, it's sort of, this is a conglomerate of something based in Rome, probably a European conglomerate that has reformed the Roman Empire, right? And so you would say to the north from Europe would be, well, it'd be Russia, right? Russia, that area up there, the Slavic areas, right? But this is actually a map I made some time ago. I'm not sure if that's exactly correct, because it could also be anywhere in here, right? Turkey, Syria. Well, you say that's south from Europe, right? But it's north from Israel. And the situation is in Daniel chapter 9, most of the places where people are going is in relation to Israel, north, south, all that kind of thing. That's why you have the Seleucid Empire here in Syria and Iraq are north from Israel, and Egypt and Libya, the Ptolemies, are south from Israel, so it's north and south. And so when he says the king of the north, he's probably more likely talking about the king of Syria, Turkey, this area north of Israel. But in the past, I've assumed it might be Russia, and I guess that still is possible. Russia is still to the north of Israel, aren't they? And then the king of the south is almost certainly got to be Egypt, Libya, that area. That's what's been established throughout the rest of Daniel chapter 11. King of the north is the north of Israel. King of the south is definitely Egypt and Africa, right? So these kingdoms, probably I would say something like this. You know, maybe I can change this on the fly. It's probably something like this: the north and the south. And these kingdoms stand against this European empire that's reformed, the reformed Roman Empire of the Antichrist. And he goes and he comes down to attack them. Now, when he does, he's going to be involved in the area of Israel. And so there's a war of the Antichrist that he is going to participate in when he rises to power. And it's going to include nations to the north and south of Israel. We can say that much, at least, I think. let's go back to the text. Okay. So, what happens with this war? It says, he shall enter in also into the glorious land, of course, because he's fighting lands to the north and south of Israel. And many countries shall be overthrown. So many countries all around in the Middle East are going to be overthrown. But these shall escape out of his hand. There's a few countries in the Middle East that will escape out of his hand. Edom, Moab, and Ammon. That's interesting. These are all areas to the south and east of Israel. If we go back to our map, let's see. Let me pull up the map again. Okay. There we go. Let me, I'm just going to, let me get another arrow so I can just point at stuff here. So if we were going to go to our map, we would say Ammon, Moab, Edom, this all down in this area here to the south and east of Israel. So he comes down and he's going to be to the north probably of Israel. Maybe we're talking Russia, but maybe we're talking, Syria and Turkey. And he's going to be down here in Egypt and Libya. And he's going to conquer a bunch of countries in this whole area as he establishes and his empire, more not just a European, but all worldwide. And there's a few countries here he's going to leave alone. And that's, I think, very interesting. Why he would leave those alone? Why it's not big enough for him to care about? He's too busy with other things. I don't know. That's interesting. But specifically, we will see it happen when that takes place. This is not something that's specifically unique to to anything in the past or anything like that. So this all seems very futuristic. I think this works very well with a futurist view, premillennial, that kind of stuff. Let's continue because this is neat. There's a few more really powerful evidences here that I think we'll see that deny a preterist, meaning it's already fulfilled view, that this is all stuff in the future that's going to happen when the Antichrist shows up. So guys, remember, we'll get into this more when we get to Revelation chapter 17, because remember the goal for this series is to work through Daniel. We've done that. Next month, we start on the Olivet Discourse, okay? And we go to the Olivet Discourse one month. The next month, we're going to be in 1st and 2nd Thessalonians. That might be two months, 1st and 2nd Thessalonians. And then we go to Revelation and we start working through Revelation chapter by chapter. When we get to Revelation 17, I think we're going to find some really cool stuff because Revelation 17 talks about how this empire rises to power. Interestingly enough, in Revelation 6, when you have the seal judgments, you have the first seal judgments is a rider on a white horse that I think is very plausibly. In fact, I don't know if there's another really good answer for who that rider on the white horse is besides the Antichrist. The other answers I've heard kind of fail. We'll talk about that when we get to it and when we study Revelation. But right after the Antichrist, you know what the next rider on the white horse on the next horse represents? It is war. It's a rider on a red horse. Right? Red horse? I'm pretty sure it's red. And it represents war. Right on the heels of the Antichrist coming is a war, because the Antichrist now needs to establish his kingdom and nations are going to rise against him. That's, I think, what we're seeing here on this map. We're seeing the war that transpires as a result of the Antichrist trying to control the world, really. And he puts down his enemies, right? And Edom and Moab and the children of Ammon are the only nations he doesn't conquer in the Middle East, apparently. And these are just the areas south and to the east of Israel, controlled today by different Islamic states. Let's see. Back to the text. Here we go. He shall stretch forth his hand upon the countries, and the land of Egypt shall not escape. Yep, we know that because he's going to the south, right? But he's saying that he's going to be successful. They're not going to escape. But he shall have power over the treasures of gold and silver and over all the precious things of Egypt. So he's going to get a lot of money out of it. And the Libyans and the Ethiopians shall be at his steps. Okay. But tidings out of the east and out of the north shall trouble him. Now this, I don't know of any fulfillment where this could be pointing to Julius Caesar. Maybe I need to read a little bit more on J. Rogers. Maybe Jay has written something on what he how this is fulfilled in Julius Caesar. I don't know of a way that this is fulfilled in Julius Caesar from my study, and I've attempted to look into different postmillennial views on this. Maybe I've missed it. So if you guys find that, send it my way. I always appreciate when you find something I haven't found yet. That helps me so much in my study. But in my study, I've not found any place where postmillennials have addressed this and tried to show how this is Julius Caesar or how this is something in the past. So Julius Caesar did war to the north and to the south of Israel, but at what point did tidings out of the east and the north troubled him, and so he went forth with fury to destroy the east and the north? Like, let's go back to our map again. What is the east and the north from Israel? The east and the north. We're talking about like Iraq, right? Syria. We're talking about Syria. We're probably talking about Babylon here. That's most likely what we're talking about. Babylon, maybe from the north. Maybe we're talking, people imagine Russia, China, that kind of stuff, but it might not be that far away. It might be closer. It might be what we're talking about: Iraq, Babylon, Iran, that kind of thing. So at any rate, when he's warring against Egypt to the north and south of Israel, to the Turkey and Syria and Egypt, while he's participating in that war, he hears of things going on in the northeast, which would be, again, let me pull up my, let me get another, there we go, get another arrow here. So this would be over here, right, in what we know as Iraq. And if he's down in Egypt, he's now going to come up to defend against whatever's coming over here from the east, right? And that's why it says that he's going to plant his palace, his tents here in Jerusalem in order to defend against what's coming from the north and the east. Maybe this is Russia, maybe this is Iran, We like to think that because we think of the countries that are around today, and we think this is going to happen in the next few years, right? And it could possibly, but it also could be 100 years from now, and we could have completely different countries in different places. So we don't know all that stuff. Let's go back to the text, though. So this is why it says that when he hears this, he's down in Egypt warring, but when he hears these things, he's going to go out of Egypt with great fury to destroy it utterly, to make away many, and he shall plant the tabernacles of his palace between the seas and the glorious holy mountain. So he's going to, now there's a question about exactly where this is, but somewhere in Israel, between the seas, he's going to set up his camp, because that's where he's going to defend against those to the east and north. So again, east and north, you can see we're talking probably Iraq, this area here, the Euphrates River, maybe Iran. East and north are going to be coming down to attack him here. He's setting up his camp and sending out forces from here into the east. That seems to be what's being said. Now let's zoom in on Israel here. That's probably not a great. It's hard to even see the word Jerusalem there. Okay, you see Jerusalem here on this map. I have it underlined, Jerusalem, right? And when it says, he shall plant the tabernacle of his palace between the seas and the glorious holy mountain, there's a debate over whether it says between the mountain and the seas or in the mountain between the seas. So you can see the two seas. Let me highlight that here. Right, Jerusalem's there. There's the two seas, right? So the Dead Sea and the Mediterranean Sea. So if it's in Jerusalem, if that's his center, that's his headquarters, then he's already between the seas. Some say it's between Jerusalem and the sea, the singular sea, which would probably mean, if that were the case, we're talking about this area right here, which is between Jerusalem and the Mediterranean Sea, right? So either way, we're in Judea. It would make sense for him to set up his headquarters in Jerusalem. Now, if you're thinking about this, though, you start to put together the whole timeline, and from a premillennial perspective. If this is during that time after the first few seals are opened and he's doing this war, we're in the first half of the 7 years that are called the tribulation, then what's happening right now? Well, there are two witnesses in Jerusalem testifying against him, saying he's not God, and that that the earth should serve the one true God. You can read about that in Revelation 11. And so him in Jerusalem and the two witnesses in Jerusalem is going to explain why the two witnesses have people coming against them trying to kill them, because he's going to be sending guys to try to kill these guys, and they're consuming them with fire. But eventually, it says in Revelation 11 that God allows them after, somewhere in that fourth year of the seven, he allows the Antichrist to kill those two witnesses. And that's probably when he marches. Now that the witnesses are out of the way, he can go into the temple and claim that he's God and sit in the temple and claim to be God. So that seems, from a premillennial perspective, that's very consistent. It fits exactly with Antiochus, who set up an image to himself in the temple and claimed to be God, who desecrated the temple. And the timing works out just perfectly, because you've got a rise to power, a war, 3.5 years, and then right in the middle, he's already set up his base camp for the war in Jerusalem. He's already living there for some periods of time. So he's got his capital's in Rome, but he's spending a lot of time in Jerusalem, and now he's right there. He walks in and claims to be God after he gets rid of the two witnesses. This all fits very, very well with the premillennial timeline. Doesn't prove it necessarily, but it fits very well. But back to the text, it says, "But he shall come to his end, and none shall help him." Now, I know we're already over an hour, and this would be a good place to end, because we're at the end of a chapter, but we're in the middle of a vision. So it would be I just don't feel good at ending it here, because then we'd have to pick up in the middle of a vision next time, and we basically have to review everything we just went over. So why don't I just give you all of it, and then we'll get to your questions. And I know you guys have already probably asked a bunch of questions. Let me just give you chapter 12 as well, then we'll get to your questions. Also in the questions, someone remind me that I need to discuss one thing I completely forgot in Daniel 9. That's a really powerful point, and I can't believe I forgot it, but we'll get to that later. That'd be off track. So notice that we added chapters here, but this is not what Daniel didn't write the chapter divisions. Daniel writes, "Yet he shall come to his end, and none shall help him." But this is Daniel's writing, but he's writing what the angel tells him. So, "Yet he shall come to his end, and none shall help him. At that time shall Michael stand up, the great prince." At that time. Now this is very interesting. "And at that time shall Michael stand up, the great prince which standeth for the children of thy people." Now Michael has already been mentioned in Daniel chapter 10. He is somebody who's guarding and fighting demons on behalf of Israel. Like, he fought demons to get this angel to come to Daniel so that Daniel could receive this vision. Go back and read chapter 10 if you want to know about that. So he says, so this is all connected with chapter 10. Michael's going to stand up. He's standing for the children of thy people, for the nation of Israel. He's fighting demons for them. "And there shall be a time of trouble, such as never was since there was a nation, even to that same time." This is a phrase that is a defeater. It's a killer for the preterist view, because they want to say all this was fulfilled in 70 AD, by 70 AD. You know, you have Julius Caesar or whoever is the fulfillment of chapter 11. And then chapter 12 is now switching over from Julius Caesar, 80 years later to 70 years later, whatever. I don't remember, Julius Caesar died. But now jumping forward all the way to 70 AD, when the Jerusalem was destroyed, and none of that is very evident in the text, by the way. But besides that, it doesn't work, because "there shall be a time of trouble such as never was since there was a nation." Since there was a nation. This is talking about since the nation of Israel existed. It has never experienced this kind of trouble before. It is worse than even Antiochus Epiphanes coming in and killing people for not eating pork and selling the high priesthood and offering pig on the altar. It's even worse than that. It's not better than that. It's worse than that. It's also worse than anything they ever faced before. What has Israel faced before? Well, they certainly have had the city of Jerusalem has been destroyed before. The Babylonians did that. They had to rebuild it, remember? It's certainly been besieged before. They've certainly been beaten in battles before. If all of this is fulfilled in 70 AD, then Daniel 12:1 does not make sense. There would be a time of trouble such as never was since there was a nation, even to that same time. This has to be something much worse. In fact, in Daniel chapter 7, it says that the time of trouble lasts for 3.5 years, because there's a 3.5 year persecution of Daniel's people, the Jews, and also those who are faithful to God, which is the Jews. Like they're kind of mixed together in the book of Daniel. We think of it, the church and Israel, but Daniel just speaks about them together, the saints. Now, that's a whole nother subject, dispensationalism. We'll get to that at a later date. But for now, this is very interesting because if it's a time of trouble such as never was since there was a nation, we have to be looking at something in the future. There's nothing that Israel has faced in the first century that they hadn't also faced at other times in their history. So, yeah, this can't be that. This can't be that. And trouble such as never was, even to that same time, Jesus added to that never, nor shall be, when he quoted it in the Olivet Discourse. We'll talk about that next time. But nor shall be means, by the way, guys, even just the killing of the Jews, the killing, that doesn't work either, because you have later on, you have many more Jews killed by the Nazis and by other groups. So this has to be a peculiar thing that is worse than ever before and ever after. And you can't find that in the first century. You can't find that in the first 10 emperors of Rome. It doesn't work. Postmillennialism has a very steep hill to climb to answer what that means. And so that's why one of the many reasons that why I'm premillennial. Let's go on. And at that time, thy people shall be delivered, every one that shall be found written in the book. So this is interesting. This seems to be referring to the book of life that's mentioned in Revelation and chapter 20, when the dead are judged based on the book of life. This is interesting. We'll talk more about this as we go through Revelation, as we go through Matthew 24, 1st and 2nd Thessalonians, and Revelation. We are going to be referring backwards to Daniel so many times, you're going to get sick of the name Daniel. It's just, Daniel is quoted so many times by these guys. This is why we got to start by understanding what Daniel said in order to understand what Jesus said, in order to understand what Paul was writing in 1st and 2nd Thessalonians, and in order to understand what John was writing in the book of Revelation. It's just impossible. So we will be referring back to this a lot. But look at verse 2. And many of them that sleep in the dust of the earth shall awake, some to everlasting life, and some to shame and contempt. Everlasting shame and contempt. This is also a difficult verse for postmillennial, because it says, at that time, it says, to that same time, and at that time. Two times you have at that time, and it's referencing when the Antichrist comes to his end. At that time, in that time period, when the Antichrist comes to his end, there's going to be great trouble. That means the Antichrist isn't just going to war against nations. He's going to war against God's people. He's going to war specifically against Christians. The first 3.5 years of the 7 years is a war against nations, where the Antichrist is setting up his kingdom. The last 3.5 years is a war against anyone who won't worship him as God. Those are the two wars of the Antichrist. So here it says, at that time, in that time period, he's going to war against God's people. There's going to be trouble such as never was since there was a nation, even in that same time. And at that same time, thy people shall be delivered, everyone that shall be found written in the book of life. So that's not like thy people now is not just a nation. It is those who are believers. The believers who are in the nation of Israel will be delivered. Interesting. And many of them that sleep in the dust of the earth shall awake, some to everlasting life, some to everlasting contempt. So this is talking about the resurrection. Whoa. Guys, if this was 70 AD, why didn't the resurrection happen in 70 AD? Preterist, with very few exceptions. But no, it would be like an extra Christian view of this to say, oh, well, this was a claim that the resurrection happened in the first century. I don't know of any Christian scholars who would say that the resurrection happened in the first century. Certainly not the resurrection to everlasting contempt or everlasting hell that Jesus is going to refer to in the book of John, some to everlasting judgment and some the resurrection unto life. There's two resurrections here. This is a reference to Revelation 19, but Revelation 19 gives the resurrections and says that it's at the end of the millennium. Here it says, and during that time, meaning the resurrections have to begin during that time even though they end at the end of the millennium. We'll talk more about this when we get to Revelation 19. But let me pull up our map of the millennium and kind of try to give you an explanation here of this very briefly. The premillennial isn't going to have too much of a problem with this, but it is a little bit of a head scratcher. So just so we understand, you have here 7 years, and then Jesus returns. We believe that when Jesus returns, he raises from the dead those who were believers, at least those who were believers during the 7 years. Now, I tend to believe that we have a rapture where we have a resurrection before the 7 years, and then the resurrection continues at the end of the 7 years. But even if you don't believe in the pre-trib rapture, you still believe that when Jesus returns, he resurrects people. That's the beginning of the resurrection. And then at the end of the 1,000 years reigning on the earth, the millennium, he does the final part of the resurrection where he raises even the unbelievers and they stand in judgment before God, right? So you have the resurrection stretching from the time when Jesus returns during the 7 years, at the end of the 7 years, I think even at the beginning of the 7 years, all the way until the end of the millennium. So it works. It says at that time, you're going to have the resurrection. And by the way, the resurrection is going to include people rising to eternal life and rising to eternal death, the end of the 1,000 years. So that works. But for the postmillennial, the preterist, they're going to have to say that the resurrection started at that time. Like, what are we talking about, 70 AD? And how is that? Nobody raised from the dead in 70 AD. And so the answer they give is that, well, it started with we have resurrected spirits. We've entered into the resurrection because our spirits are made new and we're promised new bodies. And so we've entered into the everlasting life already, even though our bodies aren't resurrected. But in the future, then you have the fulfillment of the resurrection at that time. Well, guys, let's look at the text again and see if that's allowed here in the text. Look at this. It says, and many of them that sleep in the dust of the earth shall awake, some to everlasting life. That means they are dead, and they are awoken out of death. Their bodies come up from the grave. They sleep in the dust of the earth and come to everlasting life. This is not talking about someone becoming a believer and having everlasting life in their hearts and having a promise of eternal life, that kind of thing. This is people who are dead coming to life. Some to receive everlasting life and some to everlasting contempt. This doesn't fit with the postmillennial view. It has to be premillennial. There's no other way to look at this. I'm sorry. I'm trying to give you both views, but I'm just saying this doesn't work. You can check out Jay Rogers' book. I'm sort of including his arguments. His arguments would be that it is, well, there's a parallelism here. So it's just saying everlasting life means people are getting it, receiving it. It's a spiritual thing, right? But there's nothing, the text does not at all allow for this to be a spiritual fulfillment. Many of them that sleep, that means they are dead and in the dust of the earth will awake, meaning their bodies are awoken. Their bodies come to life. Some to everlasting life, some to everlasting contempt. There's no way to get around that, guys. This is talking about the end times. This is the end times. This is why postmillennials don't spend a lot of time on Daniel 11 and 12, because it's probably the most difficult passage at least it's certainly the hardest part of Daniel for them to deal with. And Daniel's already it beats up a preterist pretty hard. So I feel bad. If I was a postmillennial, I would change my view. But until I change my view, I'd be nervous going to Daniel. I don't blame them. All right, let's finish up chapter 12 here, and then we can get to your questions. I know we're going long today. Verse 3, and they that be wise shall shine as the brightness of the firmament, and they shall turn many to righteousness as the stars forever and ever. So we're going to see a lot of people saved during this period of time. That's interesting. And I think we see that actually in in Revelation chapter 7, we see this whole host of people that seem to be turned to righteousness as a result, I think, as a result of those 144,000 witnesses that are witnessing on the earth. But at any rate, I think this is reflected in the book of Revelation. Verse 4, but thou, O Daniel, shut up the words and seal the book even to the time of the end. Many shall run to and fro, and knowledge shall be increased. Okay, I'm not going to offer a whole lot of thoughts on this because everyone has a different idea. What does this mean? Many shall run to and fro. That means like airplanes and cars are going to get you around faster. And knowledge shall be increased. The web, internet and all that kind of stuff. Maybe that's what it's talking about. It's hard to really tell, guys. I mean, it's hard to tell if this is talking about the internet, or maybe it's just saying many are going to go back and forth throughout the Bible and try to understand this. I don't know. I don't know. This is a we'll ask God when we get there sort of a verse. It doesn't really prove one view or the other, so I'm going to kind of breeze past it, okay? I apologize for not giving you answers on that one. Then I, Daniel, looked, and behold, there stood other two. Remember, he's been talking to an angel. Now he sees two more angels, the one on this side of the bank of the river and the other on that side of the bank of the river. He's standing by the river when this all happens. I can't remember the name of the rivers. You can see it in Daniel 10. Now I got to tell you. Okay, let's go back to Daniel 10. I'll find you the name of the river. I know people are asking, what's the name of the river? Okay. Let's see. The river Hiddekel, that's what it was, verse 4. And on the 4th of the 20th day of the first month, as I was by the side of the great river, which is Hiddekel. So he's, I think he's in Persia, actually, when he does this. So let's go to chapter 12 again. Here we go. And they that be wise, okay. But then I, Daniel, looked, and behold, there stood other two, the one on this side of the bank of the river, and the other on the other side of the bank of the river. And one said to the man clothed in linen, which was upon the waters of the river, how long shall it be to the end of these wonders? Okay, so the end of everything that I just said, how long will it be? And I heard the man clothed in linen, which was upon the waters of the river, when he, by the way, the man clothed in linen seems to be, if you look at chapter 10, Jesus. I think that's a good guess. I believe that's what it's speaking about. This is a pre-incarnate appearance of Christ. So go do your own study on that and see if you agree with me. I believe that's the case. But anyway, I heard the man clothed in linen, which was upon the waters of the river, when he held up his right hand. By the way, he's already seen this man in chapter 10. And he left his left hand unto heaven, and swear by him that liveth forever, that it shall be for a times and a half. So the question comes. One said to the man clothed in linen, how long? So these angels are talking back and forth, and one of them talks to the man in linen, meaning talks to Jesus. And I think this is solid. When we look at Revelation chapter 1 and we see Jesus appear to John and his appearance, we'll go back to Daniel 10 and show that the appearance is the same, and that why I believe Daniel chapter 10 is a pre-incarnate appearance of Jesus Christ. And the man clothed in linen is the man from chapter 10, which I believe is a pre-incarnate appearance of Christ. So you've got these angels that are speaking, I believe, to Jesus, who's sort of on the river, hovering over the river, and they ask him, how long will this be? And he says, unto a times and a half. Times, so there's three, one time, two times, and then a half. Okay. So this has already been said to us in Daniel chapter 7. Remember, Daniel chapter 7 said there was going to be a times and a half. It was going to be 3.5 times that that this evil king, was going to be allowed to persecute God's people, allowed to kill the saints, war against the saints. And then that was in chapter 7. So now in chapter 9, we also have this 7-year period, and in the midst of a 7-year period, you have in the midst of it, the midst of the week, the sacrifice and oblation ceases. Now again, when he asks, how long will it be? He says it's for a time and a half. That means it's going to be 3.5 years. This all fits together, and it suggests that this is the last half of the 70th week of Daniel. Now, the problem with the preterist can't have that, because remember what the preterist says. The preterist believes that the last half of the 70th week of Daniel is just from the death of Christ in the middle of the 7 years on 30 AD until, which I believe he died in 33 AD. But if he died in 30 AD, that would be the death of Christ in the middle, and then Cornelius becoming a believer in 34 AD. There's nothing happening like, I mean, yeah, there's some persecution of Christians, but nothing that fulfills this, right? So what's going on there? Well, they're going to say this is the persecution of Nero right before the 70 AD destruction of Jerusalem, right? But the problem is that there's no reason in the text to split up these 3.5 years. There's a 3.5 years here from Nero, then 3.5 years here that's from Jesus's death until Cornelius, and then another 3.5 years again in Daniel chapter 11, which is until the 70 AD destruction. It doesn't make sense. Plus, the destruction from Nero's persecution starts almost 4 years before the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD. In fact, it's like, the persecution lasts for almost 4 years, and then there's still a couple more years until the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD. So I don't know that really works very well at all. So with that being said, let me go to the next part of it. There's somebody just came into the church and is cleaning. I don't know if you guys can hear the vacuum cleaner, but if you hear people talking and cleaning, or if I look distracted, that's the reason why somebody's outside the door vacuuming. Anyway, let's continue. We're almost there, guys. We've almost made it through these 2 chapters. By the way, if you started at the beginning and all the way through to the end, kudos to you. This is a good place to remind ourselves of I mentioned in Daniel chapter 9, there was a point I wanted to make. And since we've been talking about Daniel chapter 9 just for a moment, it says in verse 27 that he shall confirm the covenant with many for 1 week. That's that last 7 years. And in the midst of the week, he shall cause the sacrifice and oblation to cease. The postmillennial believes this is talking about Jesus dying on the cross. For 3.5 years, he ministers. He's baptized. For 3.5 years, he ministers. Then he dies on the cross in the midst of the week. And then 3.5 years after that, the gospel goes to the Gentiles in Acts chapter 10. So they believe that's what it is. But how is it that he confirms? This is the thing I should have mentioned last month. How is it that he confirms the covenant with many for 1 week? What kind of covenant is he confirming when he's baptized for 7 years? And then in the midst of the covenant, he's like, none of that really fits at all. Jesus didn't confirm a covenant with his baptism. There's no covenant at his baptism. You could say there's a covenant. The new covenant starts when he dies. That would be in the middle of the week. But the new covenant isn't something that's only for 1 week. So, he's going to confirm it just with Israel for a week, and you only have 1 week left to get in on this, and then the gospel goes to the Gentiles. That would be the postmillennial view, I think. But there's no confirming a covenant at his baptism. There's nothing that fulfills this. You'd think that Matthew, Mark, Luke, John would mention, when he was baptized, it confirmed that covenant, or gives some kind of reason for us to think there's some covenantal thing going on here at his baptism. But that doesn't seem to be the case. Anyway, that's something I should have said last month when I was talking about Daniel 9. All right, let's just wrap up Daniel 12, because this is really interesting. They're asking how long. He gives them 3.5 years. And so there's the answer. It's 3.5. It's a time times and a half, right? And when he shall have accomplished but here, what happens in the time times and half? When he shall have accomplished to scatter the power of the holy people, all these things shall be finished. So he says, when he's done persecuting the people, the holy people, when he's done warring against the saints, that's what Daniel 7 says for time times and a half. When he's done warring against the saints, all these things shall be finished. Wow. So there's 2 things that are being mentioned here. The war against the saints is going to go on for 3.5 years. And then when that war ends, everything that's being prophesied here is all completely done. Wow. All these things shall be finished. Now, this is really difficult to wrestle with, because if you're a premillennial, you say, okay, that makes sense. So this war against the saints has to be the last half of the 7 years. At the end of the 7 years, Jesus returns, And everything about those 7 years is completely done. All the prophecies about the Antichrist, all the prophecies about his war, all the prophecies about the kingdom of God. The kingdom of God is now here in finality and its fullness. It's all finished. The resurrection has already begun. The resurrection of the just has already happened. It's finished. And the resurrection of the unjust will come later. Some would say even that happens right away. So this works really well in a premillennial view. A postmillennial view is going to say, oh, well, when he's accomplished to scatter the power of the holy people, that is Nero in 66 AD to 69. But then you still have a whole year before the temple is destroyed in 70 AD. And so what's going on here? And so others would say, no, it was in 67 when they first sent battalions and armies against Israel, and then Israel was finally destroyed in 70 AD. So now we have a different 3.5 years. We don't have the persecution of Nero. Oh, by the way, the persecution of Nero was 64, I think, to 66 or 67. Yeah, when he was persecuting Christians. Now we don't have the Nero persecuting Christians as the fulfillment, which they said was the fulfillment of Daniel 7. That's what postmillennials say is the fulfillment of Daniel 7. That's Nero persecuting Christians 64 to 67. Now it's not Nero persecuting Christians. Now this 3.5, so 3.5 years in 7 is Nero. 3.5 years in the half of the 7 years in Daniel 9 is from Jesus' death until Cornelius is saved in Acts chapter 10. And then in Daniel chapter 12, the 3.5 years there are going to be from the first armies coming against Jerusalem until Jerusalem is destroyed in 70 AD. Do you see how this is just squirmy-wormy? This is saying, well, this over here has to be this because that's the only thing that can fit. And this, instead of saying, well, maybe this just isn't fulfilled yet, guys. Maybe you're just worming around the obvious fact that this is a future fulfillment. This hasn't been fulfilled yet. Maybe you should stop trying to force the text to fit what you've already decided it needs to say, instead of letting it just say what it says. The text has a thing it's trying to tell us, and you are trying to deny that because you are insisting that the text tells us something it's not saying. And I think that's pretty obvious here for postmillennials. At any rate, let's continue. So when he shall have accomplished to scatter the power of the holy people, and all these things shall be finished. Now, Daniel says, I heard, but I understood not. And I said, oh, my Lord, what shall be the end of these things? He's like, you're saying this, but I'm not understanding you. So how does this all end? When does it all end? And here's the response. He said, go thy way, Daniel, for the words are closed up and sealed till the time of the end. You're really not going to fully understand this until you're in it. When you're in it, you'll see it, you'll understand this is happening. Many shall be purified and made white and tried, but the wicked shall do wickedly. It's a pretty general statement, right? That could be fulfilled in a host of different areas. But he's saying over time, there's going to be a lot of people who become purified and made white. This seems to imply the Gentiles are going to come to faith in Christ and find salvation. This seems to be talking about the church. Many shall be purified and made white and tried, but the wicked will continue to do wickedly until the end. All right, there's going to be a lot of time between now and when this is fulfilled. That just seems to be what he's saying. Daniel, you don't need to know this right now because this is going to be way after your time. In fact, in verse 13, he says, go thy way till the end be, for thou shalt rest and stand in thy lot at the end of the days. Meaning you're going to die before this happens. This is not going to happen in your lifetime, Daniel. Don't sweat it. You get closer to it, people there are going to see what it is, and it's for them. This is sealed up for them. This isn't really for you to understand, Daniel. Okay, well, that's interesting. Verse 10, many shall be, the wicked shall do wickedly. None of the wicked shall understand, but the wise shall understand. Meaning the wise who are watching are going to say, this is it. This is the thing that was prophesied. The wicked are say, no, it's not. No, it's not. So you're going to have these two different factions. When this is fulfilled, the wise saying this is being fulfilled, the wicked's not even registering it or understanding it. This fits with both postmillennial and premillennial views, so let's move on. And from the time that the daily sacrifice shall be taken away. Oh. Now, according to Daniel 9, they were saying taking away the daily sacrifice is what Jesus did when he died on the cross. Remember that? That's what postmillennials said. But now they're going to need taking away the daily sacrifice to mean when the when it's somehow in reference to 70 AD. J. Rogers believes that this is speaking about the time leading up to 70 AD when Jerusalem is destroyed. But the daily sacrifice wasn't taken away. I mean, I suppose they might have stopped offering the daily sacrifice. But here it says, from the time that the daily sacrifice shall be taken away, the abomination that maketh desolate set up, meaning those two things are the same. The taking away the daily sacrifice and the abomination of desolation being set up are the same thing. The postmillennials have tried to separate these two. Sacrifice is taken away when Jesus is crucified, which it wasn't, but they say that it was. And then desolation. The abomination is the Romans entering into the temple and destroying it and making it desolate. That is not what it's saying. It's saying that those two things are the same thing. And when they happen, afterwards there will be 1,290 days. So he's asking, when does it all end? He says it's 3.5 years. And he says, but the 3.5 years starts at the abomination and of desolation and the taking away of the sacrifice. Those two things, which are one, happen, and then there's 3.5 years. And then there's the war on the saints. You see, the postmillennial wants to have the war on the saints during the time of Nero, before the destruction of Jerusalem. And then the destruction of Jerusalem is the abomination of desolation in 70 AD. This is not what we're given here in Daniel 12. Jesus specifically tells Daniel that the abomination of desolation and the taking away of the daily sacrifice is what begins the 3.5 years of war on the saints. Now you go to Revelation chapter 13. This just fits so well. He sets up an idol and he says, you guys have an image to himself. The Antichrist does, and you guys have to worship this and take the mark or else, and if you don't have the mark, I'm going to kill you. And he goes out and wars on anyone who won't worship him. And that's the last half of the 7 years. So this fits so well with Revelation. It's going to make studying Revelation so easy for you guys. If you haven't studied Revelation yet, and you've been following through the Daniel series that I've been doing, Revelation is going to be so easy now that you understand Daniel, because Daniel's already laid it all out for you. So Daniel's being told that there's an order to this, and it begins with the abomination of desolation and the end of the daily sacrifice, and then it proceeds for 1,290 days. And then he adds another time period. Blessed is he that waiteth and cometh to the 1,305 and 30 days. Okay, what does this mean? Let me pull up a graphic, because I know you guys just love graphics. And hey, look, we're definitely not getting done before 2 hours. Who cares? We'll just keep going. Just go all night. You know, you get up and tomorrow morning, the live stream will still be going. No, hopefully not. Not complaining on that. Okay, look at this graphic that I made. Isn't this a pretty graphic? This is beautiful. Everybody put in the comments how much you like the graphic that I made. You can tell I've been doing this for too long today. Need to go home, get some rest. Okay, check this out. So this is an example of what I believe is being said here. You've got 7 years, this 7-year time period from Daniel 9, and you have the first half, if you look at Revelation 11, would be that time when you have the 7 seals being opened. You probably have trumpet judgments right here, right after the seals. And then you have the ministry of the 2 witnesses that takes place in the first half of this time period. This is probably also when you have that war of the Antichrist against the other nations. But then the Antichrist starts a new war, and that's against believers. And it happens when the abomination of desolation happens in somewhere in that 4th year, right? Halfway through the 7 years. And so what he appears to be saying is that it happens not exactly at the exact halfway point. So exactly halfway would be 3 years and 6 months, right? But instead he says there's 1,290 days after the abomination of desolation, which is 3 years and 7 months, that appears to be the war on the saints. But he says, blessed is he that waiteth and cometh to the 1,335 days, which is 3 years, 8 months, and 15 days. So we're adding another 45 days. He says, there's 3 years and 7 months after the sacrifice ceases and the abomination happens. There's 3 years and 7 months. But hang on, because at 3 years and 8.5 months, now things are really good. That's what you're really waiting for. So that appears to lend to this. So that the abomination of desolation takes place in the 4th year, about 3 years and what would that be? 3.5 months into the 7-year peace treaty. That's when the abomination of desolation happens. The witnesses probably speak against this and are shortly thereafter killed after the abomination. And so we know they ministered for 3 years and 6 months, so they would continue for 2.5 months after the abomination, if they begin right at the beginning of the 7 years, which they could begin a few months before that. We don't know. And then you have 1,335 days until Jesus returns, and 1,290 days of persecution. I'm going to justify this in just a moment, but or try to do more justification of it in just a moment. But look at this: the 1,290 days would be cut short. The persecution would be cut short before Jesus returns. 45 days before Jesus returns, that time is cut short. Do you guys remember what Jesus said in Matthew 24, Olivet Discourse? Except those days should be shortened. There should no flesh be saved. I think that's what he's talking about, guys. I think he's saying, remember how Daniel said that those days are cut short. Jesus isn't going to return until 1,335 days after the abomination, but God is going to stop the persecution after 1,290 days, 45 days early. How does he do that? Well, I think Revelation tells us that in Revelation 15 and 16 with the vile and bowl judgments that God pours out specifically on the Antichrist and his kingdom. We'll talk more about that when we get to Revelation, but I think that's probably the way that he does it. But at any rate, let's go back to the text now that I've given you an idea of what I believe this is talking about. And look at what it says. It says, from the time that the daily sacrifice shall be taken away and the abomination makes desolate set up, there shall be 1,290 days. Blessed is he that waiteth and cometh to 1,305 and 30 days. So you have the abomination of desolation, and which is something like what Antiochus did. The Antichrist coming into the temple, claiming to be God, desecrating the temple, and making it unusable, desolate for holy purposes. And then he wars against the saints for 1,290 days. There shall be 1,290 days. That's what they're asking. How long is this persecution going to last? 3.5 years, 1,290 days, 3 years, 7 months. But blessed is he that waiteth for another month and a half after that, because that's the blessed thing that they're waiting for. Well, that's Jesus' return. That's the coming of the Messiah. That's the return of, right? So this all follows very well. Now think about how you have to do this as a postmillennial, right? Because postmillennials want to say that this is the countdown from the first armies entering into Israel in 67 AD until 70 AD, when they finally destroyed, in the spring of 67 to like the winter of 70, I don't remember how it works out exactly, but they say, well, that's 3.5 years. That's the time period. There we go, 70 AD. But how does that start at the abomination of desolation, when the abomination of desolation is set up? I mean, are you talking about the abomination of desolation being Jesus dying? Because then this would be in like 34 AD. If you're saying we're talking about the abomination of desolation is in 70, then why is it counting from that forward 1,290 days? You see how, if I'm a postmillennial, I'm very, very nervous about actually being honest with the text of Daniel 12, because it doesn't fit postmillennialism, guys. It doesn't work. And then verse 13, go thy way till the end be, for thou shalt rest and stand in thy lot. What is this talking about? It's talking about a resurrection. Remember the resurrection that was mentioned up here? Them that sleep in the dust of the earth. This is a literal resurrection, not a spiritual resurrection because you're saved, you're a believer, right? Now he says you're going to be part of that resurrection. Everything about this text screams premillennialism. And yet we have postmillennialism Kudos to the postmillennials who are brave enough to attempt to give answers to these, but I'm just saying even those who attempt to give answers to them are they fail. They do. Let me just pull up. We're going to go to your question in just a moment. I'm just going to pull up a couple other arguments from Jay Rogers just to make sure I didn't forget anything, and then we'll go straight to your questions and we'll wrap it up for the day. Let's see. Let me go through my Jay Rogers arguments. Okay, Daniel mentions the judgment of the wicked in parallel. Oh, yeah, so this is him talking about the judgment of the wicked. It doesn't have to happen at the same time as the judgment of the righteous, the resurrection. Well, that's true. That's fine. The problem is the resurrection of the righteous is a physical resurrection, and he doesn't really address that in his book, or at least not the book that I read. Maybe he wrote more than one book, and I haven't read all of them. A couple things he says here. Oh, the time of the end in Daniel 12 doesn't refer to the end times, but the end of the prophecy. Well, I suppose you could say that, but you still have to wrestle with everything else. Time of the end seems to be giving you the end times because you have a resurrection, because you have things that aren't fulfilled yet, all that kind of stuff. And he says when this is all done, everything's finished, which does sound like the end times, doesn't it? Let's see. Daniel is told a third time not to inquire any further, but that he would arise in his inheritance at the end of the days. That's the resurrection. We just talked about that. I don't think that's super. Don't need to cover that so much. Here he says the abomination of desolation was the presence of Roman armies that invaded Galilee and Judea in the spring of AD 67. Wait a minute. So the abomination of desolation in Daniel 9 was Jesus dying on the cross. The abomination of desolation in Daniel 12, well, it's Jesus dying on the cross and the destruction of you have taking away the daily sacrifice of Jesus dying on the cross, and desolation comes in 70 AD. But now the abomination of desolation is in 67 AD. It's like you guys are just making up numbers and throwing them on the text instead of letting the text give you what it says. This is what we call eisegesis. It's where you go to a text and say, I need this to say X, and so let's get it to say that. Instead of saying, what does it say? And let it tell you what it says. They also believe that flight to Pella. We'll actually save this one for. He says that the historical fulfillment of this is there'll be great tribulation, but he's talking about Matthew 24, so we'll save that for next month. Let's go to your questions. Here's some questions I've gotten. Oh my goodness, lots of questions. Okay, let's start. Let's start with Silver and Gold. Silver and Gold asked a couple of questions. Marcus Cambelis asked a couple of questions. Jenny Henson asked a couple of questions. So we're going to try to get to all of your questions, guys. If you're not on now, hopefully you'll be able to jump back on later after the live and hear these answers. If you have another question, it's probably too late, but you can try to punch it in and see if. I think Jonathan, our moderator, said he cut off questions. Okay, so we're done with the questions. But let's answer the ones we've gotten in. Silver and Gold. Why do these types of passages use titles over names? Is it because these kinds of events are supposed to repeat in the same manner when Jesus returns? Oh, why don't they give the names? What is it saying? The King of the North and the King of the South and that kind of stuff? Well, that's a good question. That's sort of like a philosophical question. I mean, he obviously did that. God obviously did that. So why did he do that? I think on the one hand, you have, there's a couple things to think about here. Remember that when God gives prophecy, he knows the future. He also knows how the future could be changed if he were to say a thing, right? A self-fulfilling or a self-unfulfilling prophecy. So if he were to tell the names of people, it's very possible that the devil could then just go and find those people and, try to alter the future by just changing it by just, changing their name or something like that. There's very few times when the names of a person are given in prophecy. And there is one prophecy about Cyrus, like it's going to be Cyrus who does this, and his name is used. But on the whole, God doesn't usually do that because I would guess it's probably because it would be an self-unfulfilling prophecy. It would unfulfill itself because people would know it ahead of time, where it's supposed to be something where after you see it happen, you say, oh, that was exactly what God said. Instead of saying, before it happens, I know exactly what's about to happen, right? So this is how prophecy works. It's meant to prove that God was in control the whole time after you get through a thing. It's not so much for you to see, oh, this is the thing that God prophesied about. It's for you to say, oh, that was the thing that God prophesied about. Now, there's a few exceptions to this. We'll talk about that. In the end times, Jesus says, when you see, there are some parts of the end times that you're meant to know this. But for a lot of the prophecies, you're not meant to know this. And so you're not given the name. I think there's self-unfulfillment. There's other ideas. You could probably come up with more ideas than that, actually. I bet more smarter people than me could come up with answers. Good question. Silver and Gold also asks, do these different Antichrist types appear to show a specific piece of the Antichrist? And when you put together, you get a full picture of the true Antichrist. There's really only one type of the Antichrist, like biblical type of the Antichrist, and it's Antiochus. Now, there's a lot of people who fulfill a lot of things like in history, right? Nero fulfilled a lot of like elements of the Antichrist. Some would argue for Titus. I don't think he did. I don't know that the Antichrist is supposed to destroy the city of Jerusalem. So I don't know that Titus really did. Hitler, a lot of people have said Hitler fulfilled a lot of types of the Antichrist. There's a lot of, similar. What I think it is, it's just the devil trying to bring about that time. And I think he's been trying to do that for a very long time. And God prevents him from being successful. And one day, God will allow him to do it. So a lot of times we see stuff in our world and we're like, oh, that's like making the way for the Antichrist. Maybe it is. Or maybe it's actually the devil trying to do it again, and God's just going to step in and say, no, try again next time, because the devil has been attempting to do this for a long time, and God has been preventing him from finally fulfilling it. So no, I don't know that they're just one picture of the Antichrist. Antiochus is used to show you what kind of abomination you should expect when the Antichrist comes. The postmillennials hate that because, well, they should hate it, or they should change their mind, because they have to have the abomination being Jesus dying on the cross and the destruction of Jerusalem and the armies entering Jerusalem, and none of those things are elements of the abomination of Antiochus. Antiochus was the prototype, the picture of the abomination, and he put an image in the temple claiming to be God, made people worship him in the temple of God. He offered a pig on the altar. He desecrated the temple. He did not destroy the temple. Sold the high priesthood, killed any person who remained a worshiper of the true God. Those are the types of things we should expect from the Antichrist. But yet postmillennials need to have it fulfilled in the first century and can't find those things in the first century. So ignore Antiochus. He's not a prototype of the Antichrist. But he is. He obviously is. And that's why I think that, it's another reason why I think it fails. Silver and Gold. We'll do two more from Silver and Gold, then we'll go to some from Marcus Campbellus. Silver and Gold, verse 37 has capitalizes God when referencing the God of his fathers. Does this point to the Antichrist's ethnicity, possibly Jewish? I've heard some claim he'll be Turkish. That's a good question. I think the fact that it capitalizes it is just a translation decision. Let's go there. Let me see if I can pull up another translation here and see if that has capitalized in verse 37. Okay, verse 37. Let's see. I don't often use... Come on, where is it? All right, I'm just going to go and do a quick online search because I don't often use that feature. So there's so many features in Logos I haven't used yet. That's my fault. So let's see. In the English Standard Version, it says, he shall not pay attention to any other God, lowercase, any other God. regard the God of his father, gods of his father. It's the word Elohim, so it could be plural. It's not always clear whether it's plural or singular. Most of the other translations translate it as gods of his fathers. And I think that's probably a little bit more consistent. The God of his fathers, I think, is an assumption by the King James translators, assuming that this is speaking about a Jewish person. But if you look at it, since it's obviously Roman, the interpretation is clearly this is a Roman guy. If you look at chapter 9 and chapter 7, it's clearly a Roman guy. Then God of his fathers would imply then that it would be not capitalized. Capitalized is in English. That's the translator's decision. The Hebrew just says Elohim and doesn't have a capitalize or anything. It's Elohim. So it means it could be singular or plural, lowercase or uppercase God. That's what that word means. So context tells us. And I think the context tells us that it's probably talking about the lowercase God or lowercase gods, plural, of his father. And Silver and Gold, one more question. Do you have any idea why Daniel uses 70 weeks or times and a half rather than just years? Seems open to interpretation unless it's supposed to be that way. Okay, so first of all, prophecy is something you have to dig at. It's something it's not going to say, hey, in exactly this amount of time, I'm going to do exactly this, and I'm going to, prophecy is meant to be vague enough to be not self-unfulfilling, right? It also needs to be vague enough for people to study it and search for it. There are things about prophecy that are not to be clear, that you're supposed to be wondering about, so that when you see it, you're like, wow, look at how God did this. Look at how perfectly it's done. It's also to be obscured from the devil. The devil studies the scripture. He's not supposed to know certain elements of it either. And so I think there's a lot of things going on there. I don't presume to know all the mind of God, but I do think there are answers to that, and probably more answers than what I've just given. But these are good questions, Silver and Gold. All right, now let's go to some from Marcus Cambelis. He said, verse 1135, what does it mean to the time of, even to the time of the end? I think I answered that, Marcus, but let me just go back there and cover it just in case. And some of them of understanding shall fall to try them and to purge, to make them white, even to the time of the end, because it is yet for a time appointed. So I think what it's saying is, 35 is talking about the rebellion of the Maccabees against Antiochus Epiphanes. And it says, yes, these types of things that the Maccabees are going to be participating in are the same types of things that are going to be continuing all the way until the time of the end. So you're going to see these types of things throughout history all the way until the time of the end, because it is yet for a time appointed. The final fulfillment of it is the end of it, which implies, again, that once this final Antichrist comes, there's not going to be anything like this happening ever again in the nation of Israel or anywhere, which says once this final Antichrist comes, it's the end. Jesus returns, everything's perfect, millennium's here, all that kind of stuff. And so the many people being purged and made white, getting saved, they're falling, dying even in this time, being killed, but also winning souls to Christ, that kind of thing. That's what it seems to be talking about all the way until the time of the end. So these types of things will continue until the time of the end. Okay, another question for Marcus. What does the Hebrew word in verse 1138 for forces mean? My NASB uses the word fortresses. The word actually, let me get you the actual word. The word seems to mean weapons. But I'm going to go ahead and pull up the actual Hebrew word here for you very, very briefly. It's mauzim, which is plural for ma'uz, which means a stronghold, fortress, protection, to be strong, to be a refuge. Maybe it's a different word I'm thinking. But a god of fortresses. For some reason, I read somewhere that this is something that's often used for weapons, fortresses, protection, strength, these types of things. A fortified place. That's what the word means. So, honor the god of forces, a god of his fathers, we go sons. Yeah. So fortress. Good question. Okay. Yeah, somewhere someone has suggested that it has to do more with weapons than it does with defense. But at any rate, it's his strength, his military strength. Jenny. Let's do from Jenny. What is Jay's channel? I don't know that Jay Rogers has a channel, but he has a couple books. So Jay Rogers has, as far as I know, he doesn't have a YouTube channel. If I knew that, I would definitely tell you. If I find that he has one, I will tell you. But he has two books. Let me see if I can pull them up here. I know I have them on my Kindle on my phone. The Prophecy of Daniel in Preterist Perspective is the easy one to read because it's a lot shorter. It's a condensed version of his main arguments from his longer book, which I'll be honest, I haven't finished his longer book yet. So there might be a few arguments that I find in the longer book that I'll share with you later. Oh, this is good. But for now, I haven't finished that. It's called In the Days of These Kings. So if you want the long version, it's In the Days of These Kings. The short version is The Prophecy of Daniel in Preterist Perspective, which kind of condenses his arguments for those. And so I've spent, Kindle tells me I'm 60% through In the Days of These Kings. So I'm pretty close. It's a much longer read. And it's basically the same arguments, just more detail. So when I need to get more detail on an argument that he made in Prophecy of Daniel from a Preterist Perspective, I'll dive in onto it in some of his chapters in the Days of These Kings. So that's that. Let's go to another one from Jenny. Who are the two witnesses? Jenny, I have a video about that. Go check out that video. I'll post it in the description. I believe they are either actually Moses and Elijah, or they are Moses and Elijah like. They are like coming in the spirit and power of Moses and Elijah, like John the Baptist was in the spirit and power of Elijah. But go check out my video on that to get more information. And Jenny, also, I have been taught that the 144,000 are Jewish people only. I believe so. I believe they are. And I have a video on that as well, Jenny. So go check out. I'm going to send you all my videos. But it's a long stream. And so I have answered those in those videos. I'll post a link to those videos if you can't find them, Jenny, in the description. I think we'll call it here. I can hear the vacuum cleaner right outside my door, so it's probably a good time for me to stop and and end the stream. Guys, thanks so much for joining today. I hope this has been helpful. We've concluded now our study of the book of Daniel, and that means the first of next month is going to be the first day of the month, March 1st. Is it already February? Wow. March 1st, we'll start on the Olivet Discourse. Ooh, and we will definitely get to the rapture by the time we're done the Olivet Discourse. I don't know. Maybe we'll shoot for the Olivet Discourse all in one video, but we'll see. We'll see how that works. But we'll definitely talk about the rapture by the end of that. So if you guys wanted to talk about the pre-trib rapture, finally, we will be talking about it. And I think laying the foundation in Daniel is going to help us with that. So one thing I wanted to help you guys with also is I interviewed Peter Goeman from the Bible Sojourner channel on YouTube. I highly recommend you check out his channel. And I interviewed him a couple weeks ago, finally got everything edited and put together, and it's going to be available to watch on Monday at noon Eastern time. So go in on Monday and check out my interview with Peter Goeman. Now, what we talked about was the subject of dispensationalism, which is the big boogeyman of the premillennialists. Like the postmillennials will often say, you're wrong because you're dispensational. You believe that God works differently with the Jews and then with the church, or you believe that all this and that. And so they'll make a lot of claims about it. What we wanted to do was clear the air and talk about the actual dispensationalism. And so the video is going to be called Unashamed to be a Dispensationalist. And that's really the journey that I've been on, whether or not I should ditch the word and try to pretend that I'm not dispensationalist, even though the views that I've arrived at from the scripture are called dispensationalist. And we had a really good conversation on that. And so hopefully that'll help you. It definitely is adjacent or parallel with what we've been studying with premillennialism, postmillennialism, all that kind of stuff. We're going to talk about a lot of that kind of stuff, but really we're going to be big picture, talking about the church and Israel and Romans 11 and all this kind of stuff. And are we sure that we're right in the way that we approach these texts? Are we sure that this is the correct way to look at Daniel? Is it the correct way to look at these things? Or should we just spiritualize everything, kind of like the postmillennials do when it doesn't fit with our view? That is the subject The video will be available on Monday. Come back and check the channel out on Monday, and it will be up. I might even post it as a premiere, so you guys can all watch it live as if it were live, but it won't be live if it is a premiere. But anyway, thanks for joining today, guys, and I'll see you next month. Hopefully this month I'll also have other videos out. I've been working on several videos on the trumpet judgments and on the Battle of Gog and Magog, just trying to explain those. And so we have some other things coming out. But if I don't see you between now and then, I will, God willing, we'll be having a live stream on the 1st of March, and looking forward to it. All right, let's pray. Lord, thank you for the good day. Thank you for your word. Thank you for the clarity that it gives us. And I pray that you'd help us to hold fast to it where it's clear, and to have wonderful, careful, fun, enjoyable discussion about it that helps us to grow in our knowledge of you where it is more difficult. I thank you for that today. Thank you that we've been able to dive into it, and I pray that you'd help us as we live out the rest of our day and our week, that you'd guide us, help us to love you in a greater way each and every day. Pray these things in Jesus' name.